Hi, and welcome to the July 14th tutorial. If you want to take a screenshot, this is a photo that I took when we were staying up in Mackinac Island area. This is a bridge that stretches all the way across the Straits of Mackinac, so I thought it was perfect for our prompt for July 14th, which is stretch. All right, I'm going to put the camera on pause, so hopefully you've had a chance to screenshot the reference photo, and we'll get started with our painting. Okay, don't be nervous about this one. The bridge we're actually going to just do in a silhouette with some pen afterwards. And so this is a relatively simple painting. We're going to blend some colors and do some simple washes. There are some grasses in this area. That's the only thing I'm going to sketch out, that and where the horizon is. So I'm just going to take a ruler and I'm going to mark across. I'm looking at the reference photo, and I like to gauge where things are at in terms of quarters, right? And so this horizon line falls just below the halfway point. That's how I do a lot of my perspective. It's actually kind of at the halfway point. So if I want to be really particular about it, I can measure this. So my halfway point, this is a 5 inches from here to here, is at 2.5. So I'm going to mark on the tape 2.5. And so that just gives me a nice spot to rest my ruler and draw in my horizon. Okay. And there are some of these, like these tall, reedy grasses. We could leave them out if you want to leave them out and you just want to focus and simplify and just focus on the background, the sky, and the water. And then we'll do the bridge at the end. You can do that. If you want to do the grasses, I think I'm going to paint them in because to me, they stretch along the water. Everything is very elongated in this image, so I think it fits the prompt really well. So you decide what you want to do. I'm going to just kind of sketch in where they are. They're kind of here, and then there's like a little clump here, and then they come out here all the way sort of past the, and again, this is where I'm using those quadrants, right? This is about the middle of my page, but those grasses stretch past the middle. So that's how I know how far to bring them out. And they're shorter here, and they kind of push back a little. So my line kind of comes at this, at an angle like here. And now I'm gonna make them a little taller as they get closer, and then they get shorter again. All right, there we go. That's it for my grasses. These are going to be a little trickier to paint, so like I said, if you want to leave those out, you can. I'm going to put them in because I think they'll be fun. Okay, and then we do have some land in the background. So I'm just going to, it's not a perfectly straight line, but the line actually of this land is pretty straight. Okay, so that's all we need. We are going to draw in the bridge later. And if you decide you don't want to do the bridge and you just want your painting to be like this horizon which stretches out, that's okay too. You can simplify this as much as you'd like. All right, we're going to start with doing a wash from the sky down. So we're going to work top down, and the colors in here are a cerulean blue. So I'm going to move my paint palette over here so you can see it. I think if I show my whole palette, the paper's kind of far away. So I thought I would try painting this way again. And I'll just move my palette here so you can see. So this is a cerulean blue. So we're going to mix a cerulean blue, and then I'm going to mix in some of my French ultramarine as well as my darker blue. And then I'm going to use some sap green mixed in, and a little bit of my blue violet color. So those are the colors, and then there's going to be some of this pink color, which is quinacridone rose. Those are mostly what I'm going to pull from. And I'm going to start with my big flat 1 inch. This is made by Silver, and it's an Alpine White 1 inch wash brush. I don't know if that's the technical term, but that's what I call it. And I'm going to pick up my cerulean, and I'm going to make a nice sized pile there, but that's really much darker than I want. So I'm going to add some nice amount of water in there, and that's the advantage to using these big brush, is that you can get a lot of water into your palette pretty quickly. And then I'm going to pull up some of that quinacridone rose, and I'm going to just put it over here. What I'm probably going to do is wipe off my palette. Sometimes I leave my palette dirty, sometimes I leave it clean, and I think for this I want these colors to be pretty clear. So we're going to just maybe wipe this up a bit before I make any further puddles. Okay. let's get some of that quinacridone rose. This particular quinacridone rose is by Daniel Smith. The cerulean is by Van Gogh. I use a lot of different brands in my paints. It kind of depends on which paint I like the best. I'm not loyal, although I do use a lot of, mostly Rembrandt and Daniel Smith, and that's because my local art store carries those. Okay, and then we want to add a little bit of this French ultramarine over here, a pile. And by getting our piles of paint ready to go and having them sort of pre-mixed up like this, just allows us to work quickly on the page without having to stop and mix up more paint. So I want enough of these light washes so that I can work without stopping. Okay, and then the other thing I want to use is a little bit of this. It's called Permanent Blue Violet. This is a Rembrandt color. I really like their paints too. All right. It's funny how you come back to the same paints over and over and over again, and different artists have different preferences for what their favorites are, but I pull the same things out of my palette over and over again. I could probably get away with a palette of 12, but I do like the extra colors sometimes. Okay, ready? Let's get painting. Oh, you're also going to want a paper towel nearby with you and a little crumpled up, because that's how we're going to pull out our clouds. Okay, and so it's going to start off with a brighter blue, and then it's going to get a little darker. There's a bit of the darker blue, this French ultramarine, and then the pink is just kind of off in the horizon, and then we're going to mix that purple and blue together to create this kind of land area, and we're going to let it fuzz up just a little bit, but not too much. We might do it softly and then go back over and make some harder lines, and then those same colors get sort of mirrored here within the water, and that often happens. Water is either reflecting the things that are on shore, if the water's very close to the shore, or if it's in a circumstance like this, it's reflecting whatever's happening in the sky. All right, so I'm going to start with my cerulean. It's probably a little, that's okay. All right, and we're just going to go like this. This is what's so nice about this big wash brush. And I do have a lot of water. This works much better on a cotton paper. I'm using Meaden's paper, and I'm going to bring the blue all the way down. Actually, let's just bring it down across the whole thing. Okay, and that's just going to give us our base layer, partly because I had so much paint. Now, what I'm going to do is go through and I'm going to pull some water out of here, and you can see in the reference photo that this is smooth and glassy, and the rest is so I'm just going to kind of, using a sideways motion, move here. So this, because this is glassy, it's a little lighter. It's smoother, so there's more reflection off of it. All right, so we just pulled a little bit of the blue out here, and then we're going to end up darkening the blue here and here. And that's going to give it this difference between what's smooth and glassy, and then as you get out more, like this is kind of a protected area of the water, and then it gets a little choppier out there. Okay, so while this is still wet, we're going to take our paper towel, and we're just going to dot it along here to make a cloud here. And remember, our reference photo is just to give us an idea. We do not have to follow it exactly. There's no rules. And then there are clouds that are sitting more along the horizon a bit, and so we're gonna go like this. There. And that's it. And I've got kind of a funky line right up here where my wash just kind of a funky water bloom. It means that my brush was full of less water when I wiped it across this one. When I swiped it this way, it had more water in it. So it's made these kind of funky lines. I like that. I'm going to leave it. If I could soften it up a little bit if I wanted to. Maybe right up there. But I'm going to leave the rest of it. There. I think that in the sky it just is interesting, and this is the beauty of watercolor, is that we can just play with what the water and paint does naturally. Okay, so now I'm going to put this brush aside, and I'm going to get out my size 6 round. And the next thing we're going to do is take a little bit of this darker French ultramarine. It's actually not darker, that's the wrong word. It's that this has a more brilliant blue, and there's a lot more kind of green undertones in this cerulean. And this is, I would say, a very true blue. Okay, And I'm just gonna dot in like this because it kind of, this guy does this little streaky bit of stuff, right? And a little bit underneath of these clouds, it's a little streaky. And again, I'm not following the reference photo exactly. I need to get a little more water on my brush. I don't want too much water on my brush because I have a wet surface here, and if I have too much water on my brush, I'm going to touch this paper, and then that water is going to interact with what is already down in the paper, and it's going to create water blooms. So if you're getting a lot of blooms, a lot of times that's what that means, is that you probably have too much water in your brush. Okay, so we're just going to kind of let that set. Now I've rinsed my brush. I'm going to pull the water out, maybe a little more water here, and I'm just going to touch this to kind of soften it up. Okay, and then where we're seeing some pink is it's just kind of touched into these clouds. So I'm going to really dilute it. I don't know if you can see the edge here, like there's barely any color to it. I'm just going to leave it super soft, and I'm just going to touch just the bottom of these clouds with that pink. And then there's a little bit more over here underneath. It kind of sits to the bottom of the cloud. Maybe a little here. Okay, and I'm going to leave it. It's more complex in the photo. Maybe we'll add just a little pink here because I think it'll be pretty. But that's it. Okay, I'm not going to touch it anymore. We're going to keep this fairly simple. And now we're going to work on the water here down. And so this has a lot more cerulean blue than it does that French ultramarine. And so we're going to go back to that. And I'm going to pull, I've got my puddle here. This is just a bit more concentrated towards the back. So I'm going to pull from there. And we're going to come in here, and we're just going to make this kind of back and forth motion with your wrist, right? And I'm going to try to not hit every inch of the page. And if you can see, I've got these little bits of white between. And I'm not doing, not too much, but just enough. And I'm going to want to kind of bring it down between these little bits of reeds, right? And again, if you decide to leave the reeds off, you don't have to mess with those. Then that's just something you don't need to worry about. And I'm going to just make sure that I'm leaving, I'm not arching. I'm being really careful to be very, stay on that horizontal. So I'm moving my whole, if you move just your wrist, your brush is going to arch. But if you move your whole arm, you're going to keep this really nice kind of horizontal feeling. Okay. And I'm just barely touching. Okay. Now there's this kind of smooth path. It comes a little bit further down here. Okay. And it smooths out here. So we're going to leave this alone. We're not going to put anything in it. In the reference photo, you can see there's a hair bit of pink. But if I try to brush that pink in here, it's not going to go well. I think it's going to be too dark. I like how light this is. So I'm going to leave this in that blue, leave it nice and soft. And then as we get closer here, and this happens often, the farther away the waves are, when you see a roughness, those little white caps or that roughness is really close to each other, and it's very textury. And the closer it gets to you, the wider those gaps are. And so now, and also this changes a bit. So I'm going to get, it's a little darker. So I'm going to get a bit more of that cerulean blue on my brush. I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to kind of draw it out. And I'm going to let it touch in some places. And I'm going to let it blend together, and I'm going to keep it separate in other places. And I'm just going to kind of come in like this. And as it gets further out, it gets a little closer together. There. Now, I want to, so it's kind of rippling here. What I want to do is add a bit of this French ultramarine. And I'm going to put it towards the bottom. So like, see how we have a little bit of white here? I'm going to put that French ultramarine right on top of where that white is, right? Just to give it the illusion of some extra depth. And we're going to do the same here. There. And just gives it just a bit something. Ooh, my tape's got a little bubble in there. That's okay. All right. If you feel like this is a little harsh right here, I'm just going to draw that out a little. Just to soften it. So I have just water on my brush right now in order to draw that out to be softer. Okay, and so now you can see you have these like up close ripples. You have this kind of smooth space here, and then it's a little choppier here. And this is just really subtle. We're keeping it subtle and soft. This is a subtle and soft picture. And I'm gonna leave a lot of things out. That's the other thing. Okay, so as this is starting to dry a bit more up here, what I want to do is mix in some of my French ultramarine. I'll do it in the front here. Ooh, that's so brilliantly bright. And I'm gonna grab in some of my permanent blue violet. And you see how we get this just gorgeous color? That's really bright. And what's off in that background has a little bit of gray to it. So we're gonna add just a touch of the pink to gray it out. Just a touch. And if we really wanted to neutralize it, we could add a touch of yellow, but we don't have yellow anywhere else, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let this color be what we use. And it's a little more green in the picture, like a little more blue-green, but I like this purpley color, so that's what we're going to use. I think that mirrors with what's going on with the clouds pretty well. So now I'm just going to come through here, and I'm going to, again, I'm moving my whole arm to keep this really nice straight line. There we go. And then I'm going to come to the top, and I'm just going to wiggle my brush a little bit to give it a little bit of texture. And this is a little higher up here. There. Okay, that's it. Okay, that's the land off in the distance. And again, mine is a little more purple than what's in the reference photo, but that's what I want. Okay, so now we have these green reeds. And we're gonna use a trick. Actually, it's a really fun trick. Okay, sometimes this works really well for me. Sometimes I gotta go back and fix it, but let's give it a try because it's fun. I'm gonna pull out my size 1. This is like a liner brush, or sometimes called a rigger. It depends on the line that you are purchasing from. Sometimes it's given different names, but sometimes a striper. So we're gonna get this wet. You see how it's a long, narrow brush, and we're going to pull out our sap green, but because I want to kind of join everything together, and these are darker, I'm going to just mix that sap green. Ooh, that's really bright. I'm going to mix it in with this purpley color. So I'm keeping it green, but it's like this bluey green, right? So that it's not so jarring. And it kind of neutralizes it. Now I'm going to load my brush up, and I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to lay it almost flat on my paper, and I'm going to pull like this. I almost need to move. You know what? I have an easier time if I do this with my paper sideways. All right, let's get this. And so we're going to go like this, and we're just going to push up. I need a little more water. You don't want too much water because then it'll start blending together, but if you don't have enough water, it doesn't work either. So it's kind of finding the fine line between the two. So we're going to go like this, kind of along the bottom edge, and then I'm just going to kind of scrub it up like this. And it just kind of brings things up in a kind of a natural way. Yeah, see how I said sometimes this works really well and sometimes it doesn't? I guess this is one of those times it's not really wanting to work for me. That's okay. I learned this technique from a guy, I think his name is Steve Mitchell, and he has some good, there we go. I might just need a slightly, it's a nice way to create some foliage in the distance without like feeling like you got to create every single brush mark. And that's what I like about this way of doing things. And it might be that the brush that I'm using is just a little too skinny. It might work a bit better if I had a striper that was a bit thicker, like maybe a size 2. So that might be part of my problem, or maybe it's just my technique. I don't know. Not sure. Oh gosh, my paints are really well hydrated. Okay, there we go. Perfect. That's a nice, I like that. A little more green. so now let's pull it again. There we go. I didn't have enough water. Do you see how we're just kind of flicking it? And it creates this kind of jagged, grassy texture. I'm just going to flick, 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 flick. Now, alternatively, you could try to paint these in individually, but I find that it's never quite as natural looking. And, you know, it's a little blumpy here and there, but that's okay. Okay. There we go. And if you want to like just touch up a few spots, you can go back in and add some finer grasses. It's just kind of nice to add a few finer spots. But what I like about using that method is that I think if I do it all with brush marks, what ends up happening is it looks way too contrived. It's not loose at all. And I'm going to take this darker, I've got this like darker gray, blue, green area here. I'm just going to kind of mix that together. And I'm just going to run that along the bottom of this just to ground it a little. I'm going to skip this area where it's almost like it sticks out a little bit. So we're going to let the light kind of pull in there. There we go. All right, and just adding that little bit of darkness helps to give it a bit more dimension. And because everything's wet, that paint flows in really well. If we want, we can just do a couple like really thin. There we go. All right, I'm really happy with that. Okay, so we're gonna paint in our bridge next. I think at first when you look at this, sometimes it can look a little overwhelming, but it's really not. It was really a pretty simple thing to paint. You can be done, and you can use this for your stretch prompt, and it's just that the horizon is stretching off and the water's stretching and the sky is stretching. That's always what I think about, like how nature stretches in front of us, stretches out farther than we can imagine. And so we can leave it here, but I'm going to do the bridge, and so I'm going to do that by... In my reference photo, it's lighter, but we're actually going to use it as though it were a silhouette because I think that is easy. But this has to dry first. So go ahead and put everything on pause, and we'll come back together when this is all the way dry. And we want it to be all the way dry, so maybe 30 or 45 minutes. You can use a hairdryer to dry it up if you like, to make things go faster, or you can just come back, maybe later. Later in the day, you decide. Okay, so I'm going to put us on pause now. Okay, we have let our painting dry all the way. Now we're going to draw in the bridge, and it starts about here. So I'm going to make a little landmark for myself because this is where I want to land. But from here, from the perspective, it's kind of just up over this tree line in the distance. And so we're just going to draw a gentle arch down to this spot. So I'm going to go with my pencil, and I'm just going to draw, I'm going to move my wrist in a way that I can be nice and smooth because it's kind of hard to erase pencil from paper that's already painted. And then we're just going to kind of dye it into here. Okay, so that is the bottom of my bridge. Now, because this is farther in the distance, it is, and I'm not going to go, we're going to use our pen to bring it into this space right here. But I don't have to, I'm not going to draw heavily with my pencil. Now it's narrower here because it's farther away, and it's a little taller here because it's a little closer. So what we're going to do with this top line is we're going to start it wider, and then we're going to slowly close it closer to the bottom line so that it looks like it's going off farther and farther away, because it is getting farther and farther away. There we go. Now, we have two big upright posts. One of them is right about here, and I'm going to use a ruler in order to draw mine in. When I look at how high they are, I'm looking at my picture, and let's see. It's about 1/5. Okay, so I take my fingers up on my reference photo, and I go, okay, if I had to divide this in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 1/5, and it starts kind of at this you know, where this horizon is where my first one is, and it's going to be about this high. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm always dividing things up. I'm dividing them in halves and thirds and quarters and eighths to try to figure out what my perspective is. And so with this, I'm holding my finger up to my actual reference photo on my screen, and I'm measuring. It's actually about it's a little under a fourth, right? If I divided my paper into quarters, I'm measuring the height, right? Height. Okay? I don't know if that makes sense, but it does in my head. I hope I'm being helpful. Okay, and it sits, if I look at the picture this way, right, and I divide my picture in half, which is about here, this column sits just slightly to the left of the halfway mark. So I'm going to start my column here, and I'm going to make it about a fourth of the total height of the painting. And I'm just going to come up there. There's my first one, and I'm going to bring another line next to it. There's my second one, and it's almost right across, right? I think it's actually, yeah, it's just kind of straight across, and there's a support here, and there's a support at the bottom, and then kind of arches down, and then there's two supports that divide up here. So we've got 1 and 2. And my proportions aren't exactly right. I can see my arch is a little higher. That's okay. Nobody's gonna know. Okay, so now, again, I'm dividing myself in half, and I can see that this support is a little, if this is my middle, it's to this way, but it's a little farther. It's like right about here. So we're gonna come up here, and it's not quite as tall as the other one because it's farther in the distance. So if my first post is about 1 inch tall, well, about 1 1/4 inches, this one's gonna be a little less than 1 inch. And so we're just gonna come up, and I'm gonna come up, and it's gonna be a little closer together because it's just all smaller. And we're just gonna go ahead and draw across, and we've got the second and the third, and then this, right? Okay, so I've got my 2 main posts, and now I have a nice big support pillar right here. And so I'm going to draw that. And then we've got a small support here. Again, my bridge is a little taller than the reference photo. All right, and then we've got some smaller supports here. And you can see this great big support here is mirrored over here. Okay, now the next thing is that we have these long cables, and so this is the front, right? So it's going to come down and up. So down and up. I'm going to go down from both sides. And then this one is going to go a little bit like that, right? And then we're just going to go, I'm just swooping it. Again, we don't have to be perfect. We get the idea. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, now, because this is going to be in silhouette, I'm going to get a black marker. You want it to be a really fine tip. I have a collection of markers here. I'm going to use my 0.05, which is the finest one that I have. And because I just want it to be light. And I'm just going to trace over my lines here. And I can make them a little darker wherever I need to. I'm going to start with this much thinner. You could paint this if you wanted to paint this with a very fine brush. It's pretty tricky. Okay. And we're just gonna bring these cables this way. this way. I'm just kind of tracing over what I have. Oops, little bobbles here and there. It's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, and we're going to go to this under part. And then this bridge has all of that kind of metal work, right? And we're just going to kind of take this road off to the distance. Okay, and so for this, I'm going to do some little vertical triangles along the bridge. Kind of little diagonal lines. This is kind of a fun part, right? And as we get farther away, they're going to get closer together, and it's going to be harder to see exactly what they are, and they're going to kind of turn into little X's, because I'm not going to go back and add any more details to those. I'm just going to let them be. But over here, they have some up and down. In the center of each one is a little vertical kind of rail. So at each point, I'm just drawing a little vertical line like that. Okay, so I've just got my little vertical lines. You just keep going, and again, you can add as much or as little detail as you want to this. Okay, and I'm getting to the farther away part where I'm just going to leave that be. Here we go. Okay, now I think what I'm going to do is switch to a slightly larger pen, because this one's really fine, but I think for these posts, they're a little larger, so I want to go a little larger. So I'm going to pull out my 0.5, and I'm just going to kind of come here, and sometimes I'm going to turn my paper sideways. That helps me to keep these lines nice and straight. And I'm going to just add some arches here and there because I want to. I'm going to kind of arch that both forward and backward. So this has got some dimension to it, so I'm going to kind of widen that up a little bit. And then we're just going to add a little kind of swoop to this because I think it looks interesting. And then we're going to do the same thing here for this one. But this one, of course, stays a little smaller, a little narrower. Everything here is farther away, so we're not seeing as much. We've got this like bigger thing underneath. Got this big posty thing, and I'm just going to add a couple little vertical spots just to give an illusion of some of these supports. Now this is like this big concrete block, and so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to just kind of give myself a bit of shading on this side, and on this side I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do a little diagonal there. It's going to be a little lighter. There. Okay, so we have our bridge. That's it. I'm going to take out my pencil marks very, very carefully, just by doing a very light pounce. Now there are vertical cables happening all along these wires, but I think if I try to draw those in, it's just going to get super confusing. And what we don't want to do is muddy up the painting. I think right now we have this really simple, great illusion, like the bridge. You know this is a bridge. If you live up around or near Mackinac, you probably recognize this as the Mackinac Bridge over the Straits. And so anyway, this is it. This is where we're going to leave it. Thanks so much for painting with me today on July 14th. I look forward to coming back and painting with you again tomorrow for July 15th for World Watercolor Month. All right, sometimes I forget to peel this tape when we're done, and then you don't get to see that tape peel, which is so much fun. This is my favorite, one of my favorite parts. There we go. And there we go. All right, and I did have a comment about getting a microphone, and that might be really helpful so that you can hear me better, so I am working on that. Hopefully that will improve the quality of the sound. It's just going to take me a few days for that to come to the house. So thanks for painting with me. I'll see you later.